Welcome everyone to the June 17th SIG Node meeting. Today we have one agenda item to start us off. We've got Itamar, who I'm looking through the list. Is Itamar here?
Yep. Hi, Peter.
Oh, great. Hello.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ensure we're all on the same page here. So with regarding to node swap, there have been discussions lately. I feel that we're gravitating towards folding the pod level swap API into the old node swap cap. And then having it disabled by default and on an opt-in basis, and basically have another round of beta, and then GA it in 135. Personally, for the record, I'm not, I would rather it to be on by default. But if that's the consensus, then let's do it. So any thoughts, objections?
Just to clarify,
I think the only.
Sorry, go on, Peter.
Go ahead, Kevin.
We always have defaulted no swap on a node in the node config, and then you are saying that now what we want is to add a new field in the pod API that allows disabling of that will, I guess, no matter what the node config is, we will disable swap, and then that's the default, and then somebody can opt in there. That's
right. That's not the approach I was advocating for, but yeah, this is the I feel like this is the one most people agree on.
And
yeah.
And I will also mention, I think the node, the pod level swap field should have a default value that's empty and unspecified, and theoretically an admin could install a mutating webhook for pods that translates the default empty field to node swap, basically saying like all pods default to the node decision rather than opting out. So we can actually like have a way to make this default exist as it currently does, if we make the API right. So, but the default API would be disabled swap. Yeah, vertical validation policy. Yeah, exactly, AJ. I think that this approach, this approach, it sounds like this is the closest that we have to consensus. The one worry that I've had this whole time is worried about API versioning things, but as long as we feel confident that we can add this in 134 as part of CAP 2400 and then graduate CAP 2400 in 135, then I feel like this is the approach that we have that is the most popular at this.
Sure. Any other thoughts, objections? This is the time.
I had a quick understanding on the process. What does folding mean? And there was a discussion, I think, like I also brought up on what does beta 4 mean for a feature in Kubernetes. Should we document that swap is still stable? It's just that a feature addition that adds it to beta 4. I didn't want to bring the impression that like it's a feature downside, but more like an enhancement, and beta 4 doesn't necessarily, it's from reading the Kubernetes documentation, it seems to suggest beta 4 means less stability. I don't know like how to read that, but would we have any thoughts on that?
I think we have 3 options. We can, so currently we have the 2 caps, 2400 and 5359. So we can either take the contents of 5359 and just put it in 2400, basically saying like, this new pod API is just part of the node swap. That would mean making the feature gate, the API server feature gate aware of this specific feature gate node swap. The second option is doing that on the KEP level, but adding a new feature gate to 2400, saying pod level swap is a new feature gate, but within the KEP 2400. And then the third option is continuing to maintain these two different features, both of which having different feature gates. And if I miss any, anyone can mention them, but Tim, it seems you have a hand.
Yeah, sorry, I joined a little late, so apologize if I missed some context here. But new API has to go through alpha, so I think that requires that we have a separate feature gate that starts in alpha for the pod level changes. And then if we want to kind of make that part of the GA criteria for swap, generally that would just mean that, you know, that starts in alpha, it's got to catch up to beta, and then they can progress to GA together.
Yeah, we asked Tim Hawking about it, and I think the feeling was that since it's part of the same cap and just disablement API addition, then may go to beta immediately.
I think
The
if it's changing the API, it has to go through alpha though.
I think Donna's next.
Did you want to go?
Sorry, I joined late. I just heard we are trying to merge pod specific API with node swap API. I personally disagree. One of the reasons it is I don't think about simply express my state, my disagreement last time, but I wanted to repeat. One of the things first, it is I don't think about the simply enable and disable, and will change the situation. The node, the pod API, even we have to disable for certain pod, there's the neighborhood noises problem exists come from no matter how we implement of the swap. Okay, this is why I insist of the even node swap GA should be disabled by default. Need the admin to decide when to enable. Make that is clearly say there's the label noisiness problem. So then they said they can clearly say what kind of thing is going to be enabled, how to coordinate. I know there's the customer needed. Some customer needed is the per pod maximum limit, and that it is what we are trying to push it forward for long term. That's the only thing is what. But enable and disable API, I help that one. The only thing it is just add another API. And also, of course, I want to respect the new policy for the after the beta. We can and we want to make the beta it is aligned with of the GA, and also. So that's kind of my argument. I just want to restate because I think last time when we report back to the community here at this meeting, I didn't make that more clear. Yeah.
Yeah, no, a lot of conversation happened in between meetings, so it's not only like this meeting and another meeting. So the question is not about whether you want disable or not. The question is what the default will be when API will be there. And there was a lot of conversations, and I think wider agreement is that disable by default is better default than enable by default. That's why decision was to fold this disablement per pod into this gap.
I understand, but my point it is that's just make application more complicated, right? So for me, like if we support later we add per pod API, the per pod API maximum limit is the 0, which it is the disable. Why we need another API at per pod to explicitly disable and enable? That's kind of my counter argument. I don't want to further complicate the API, but at the meantime, people concerned about the swap for performance downgrade. The moment we introduce the swap, that is being there. So the consideration it is not to do that is basically the feature itself by default, it is off. So then we document very well. So need the admin and the user to carefully consider the performance downgrade. But the reason we push this feature is real reason, because a lot of the workload, especially we evolve with the more workloads, right? So batch inference workload, batch workload in general. So especially for those kind of the large process. So because of those kind of the disruption will be maybe like the width about the user's work, right? So previous effort. So that's why I pro of the node swap. So the Kubernetes community also pro the node swap since last year, and that I think this is how we reach of the balance instead of the per pod n1 disable, because that's not much value. We are guaranteed we'll move forward with the more pod, more clearly granularity of the per pod maximum limit. Then that actually will achieve the same goal. My problem it is that at this new per pod API just n1 disable, don't give us the value. Only just cause more confusing and also usability. Customer have to configure more, but it doesn't help them. Still, they end up have the node with the swap, and they disable doesn't help them, right? So that's kind of my counter argument why we are further complicated of the API.
Yeah, I would also add to that node swap is a relatively new thing. We can always add APIs, but we can never take them away. And I would be interested in kind of just letting that soak for a bit and seeing how users end up using that before we add more and more APIs to this.
Yeah, Lucy, for your argument, the problem is that we have a swap is a little bit of confirmation bias. Everybody who needs swap really enjoys swap enabled in beta, and they just say like, just ship it as is. And everybody who doesn't know about swap will be surprised, and we don't know how exactly they will be surprised. That's the argument to make default safer. And Don, I'm not sure what you're arguing about. I think everybody's on the same page that we want swap enabled. And I would argue that disable per pod, like default to be disabled per pod is even better for customers. Now, like vendors can enable swap on every single node, and then application owner can decide whether they want it or not. And it's even easier than like talk to cluster admin and try him to convince to enable swap and have some labels set up. You just now have swap everywhere, and you can just enable it per pod if you want to. So I would argue that it's even a better experience. So finally, Don, like I feel like we have this conversation like in a Slack and in like in GitHub. The problem is that we have swap enablement right now, and we have a future API. So the idea was to make sure that we have a path forward to this API, and this API will be what you want long term. And right now, like if you want to join this conversation, please do. We need to discuss like what default will be in this new API, and changing the default is considered to be a breaking change as well. So like if you're saying now it will be follow the node default, and next version it will be default turn off, then it will be breaking change, and like we want to avoid this breaking change. And if you want,
I would suggest once we introduce this per pod API, so scheduler will respect this. So the user, if don't want disable of the swap, they are going to dodge off the node and end of the swap. But we even don't know the node have the swap enable or not. That's the problem for me. This is why I feel this one doesn't give customer anything. I'm the performance sensitive workload. I want to schedule of the node without swap. I cannot do that even today, right? So even you end up the per pod disable enable, you cannot do that. This is why I feel like this is need longer term, even need a scheduler, need maybe of the node capacity, a while of the scheduling to help us. It's not like API per pod n1 disable can help. Only just slow down and the cause of the ambiguity to the feature and slow down this feature. And another thing it is, I just don't want this feature is be default on. And at the moment, unless we have the node capability aware of the scheduling related feature to help on the scheduling. Sorry, like the Ita.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that just for the record, what I wanted originally is to GA node swap and discuss the API in parallel, as Lucy suggested. And Sergey, you referred to pods like wanting swap. The thing is that, like, my argument is that most pods don't want swap, or they want to avoid it. They just don't care about it. They treat it as a node level configuration. And just like, you know, on a regular Linux host, that if swap is enabled, it's enabled. You can ask to avoid it, but basically the default is just a configuration that's on the node level from my perspective. And the third point is that it's already opt-in on a node basis. So I agree with Don. I would wait with API in general, but if we have this pod level API right now, then I would advocate for an opt-out basis. That being said, I really want to GA swap. So if we reach a consensus, that let's do it.
I don't know what's the next action, Don, because I think we had a consensus before this meeting. Now you want to change it. Please feel free to jump in on GitHub and comment what you want.
Okay, so good.
Ideally, I want to make sure that we have API.
I didn't see the argument debate through the wire of the Slack because I didn't stay on the Slack every day. But I thought we have consensus. Make this is the disabled, and also there's the public doc. I believe AJ and Tama shared. We go over all those kind of things and the blocker, and we reach a consensus. I didn't see that any other new except this per pod disabled enabled yet until just last week, right? So that's kind of confusing. But I saw even you and I discussed, and AJ and I also discussed, and also in the community. I don't know when we reach another conversation until people ping me, and and now we just have the new consensus. I just heard this new consensus. But last week we do agree it is if we always go over of the public, the shared with the whole community, all the stock, and what's the blocker for the GA. We go one by one. Then we do agree if any of those kind of things is broken and we didn't achieve the goal, we block the GA, right? So that's kind of the goal for the 1.34. We move forward, right? So we still evaluate all those kind of the result. Include of the testing results, right? So, but the per pod things, I think from day one, we kind of discussed many times, and we finally say, okay, once we have the cap, we figure out the path forward to introduce per pod maximum limit. If there's no blocker for current state, we move forward, right? So, but the dynamic
we found the blocker, Don. So the once you wrote the found the blocker.
I don't know who find the blocker so far, and but I personally think about just add per pod enable and disable doesn't help. Only just make the user even more complicated use cases, right? So in the future, then we have the user have to take care of what's the maximum limit plus of the enable and disable. But enable disable for now, even when GA of the node swap, before we reach the full landed of the maximum limit, and still didn't solve of the lossy neighborhood problem for customer, didn't solve the scheduling problem for customer. So we have other dependencies. So I don't want to just forever block these features because we see the value for some of the use cases. So this is why I insist to disable this feature by default, but to make the cautious decision and document very well what's all those problems, and then we will move forward.
So would you come to GitHub and comment on that? I just don't know the path forward. So you're saying we don't want to block it forever, and like I think we unblocked it, and I think the blocker was like, let's decide what will be API long term. We even didn't get to API when we do like allocatable and limits and everything like that. We just said that the minimal API, like how do we introduce disablement of per pod? And even conversation, we found the blocker, so we decided to resolve it by folding one cap into another. So now, like, if you want to say that API will be different, like, I don't know. Please feel free to comment on GitHub. I don't know like how to resolve it in conversation, because after conversation, you need to write it down, like write down the API specifically, how it will look like and how it transition to that. So somebody will need to do that and prove it.
So Sergey, actually maybe team, one of those conversation word we have, it is because I know team also have some concern about the node as well. But the team, at least the team, I'm not sure Timo Claire is here or not today. And I suggest document all those kind of problem, concern. It is in the public share of the doc. So then we can discuss those things together. So I know there's the private Slack channel talk about this one, but I hope we can public all those kind of discussing on with of the entire of the community. So we clearly say at least that document all this problem is shared with all the community members. And of course, there's the small group of the discussion, just like you and I also discuss this node swap, and also I discuss with Yuji and Timo Claire and other people. But I just want to make sure everything's documented very well. I just don't, until today, I didn't see any other new blockers besides people worry about the noisy neighborhood problem, downgrade their performance, which is also my original concern. So for and until I see the more clear of to support the new workload, the more clear use cases, right? So that's, but I don't
understand why we continue this conversation, because like what we need right now is to write down what the API will look like in 5.3.6.0 and how 2.4.0.0 will proceed to fold into this API. Like, fold, maybe it's like folding an API needs to implement right now, or if it's completely transitionable without like any backward compatible issues, and yeah, it will be two separate caps.
Okay.
We don't need to convince anybody on this call that swap is very important.
I'm not convincing everybody. I just disagree to fold and per pod enable disable cap into the node swap
If
cap.
you disagree, we need to have an API and pass forward. So somebody need to write it down, and then it needs to go through API approval.
We don't need any change any API. Okay, I just want someone have that to think about this can pass forward beyond 1.34. This feature, current state without per pod API can move forward in the future, extended to have the per pod API. That's my personal.
That's what I'm saying. Like, let's write it down how it will transition to this API. That's what we did in 5.3.6.0. We got a disagreement with API approval, and we decided that path forward is different. I mean, if you have a different proposal, we need to discuss it. Or we can go to that discussion and like convince API approval that default is safer to be like follow the node.
Sounds good. So let's move forward. Still target this is GA without any folding any per pod. I just want to repeat again because Sergey, last time you misunderstand. So we just need to agree for the 1.34. There's the per pod swap API can move forward. Even we can GA node swap features. Is that okay? And of course, we address all the problem in that public the shared doc and all those kind of things. And but we don't need that API is implemented. We don't need that API fold into node swap. We just say this is a dependency. We are move forward. SIG Node community move forward with per pod maximum limit, and there's the path forward. Can we make that agreement? At least that's kind of what I hope we can push forward.
I don't understand how I'm making these considerations without knowing the API. that will be in.
That's true. That's also true. So let's move forward. Right now, the current plan is to move forward. But anytime we may block.
Like, how do we move forward? Like, do we not make future API a prerequisite? Like, future API to be approved as a prerequisite. So we removing this as a requirement right now. So you're just saying that we will approve this 2400 as is.
We have so many cases before. We agree to promote a certain thing from alpha to beta or beta to GA. Last minute we block because we found and something it is terrible. Now I just add a condition to this one. We plan to move forward to GA as yes, but need to address all the problem in the public doc and all those kind of things. And plus this one, we ensure this feature can be moved forward later by introduce per pod maximum limit per pod. So that's kind of what I want to add it. If we sure at the last minute, then we just GA this feature, right? So if we cannot sure, then we just reward that decision. We just apologize, say, I can apologize, I made the wrong decision, and I have confidence this can move forward, but I just apologize. If that's the case, I apologize, it's my fault. I make the wrong judgment and cannot move forward. And I apologize with the engineer and work so hard, but we couldn't promote that GA. Is that okay? I just don't want to further block this feature, and people waiting for this in production. But of course, documentation, if not clearly document what's the performance downgrade, and also we can block this feature too, right? So all those kind of things documented there. Is that okay?
I don't understand the next section and who will be doing this next section.
Any other things, please? And I'm so open to being convinced to other way. Yeah, but so far I didn't say that. I just feel like per pod, enable disable is unnecessary complexity to the users at this moment, but didn't really address the problem.
We're not talking
more than that bit of it. I'm worried that jamming in a pod level API to 2400 like will not allow us to fully think through the consequent, like all of the different options for pod API. Like I think we should find a path forward and have a alpha API that we sort of propose that has a pod level swap opt-in or out or whatever, you know, sort of options that we allow there. But folding it into a beta cap and then planning on pushing to GA feels hasty in a way. So that's my main concern with the folding in option. So like, I love the idea of moving forward to GA with 2400. I do want to find an alpha API for the pod level swap opt in or out, and I want to find consensus there just to have the future direction and be moving towards that. But it doesn't feel quite right to pull the pod level API into 2400. I do agree with you, Don, there on that. I do also agree that maybe we continue this conversation in the KEP. We have 2 more days until KEP freeze, so let's everyone get your opinions in there so we can get to consensus on the timeline that we have. And other than that, does anyone have any other notes on swap?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. I just feel that sometimes it's hard to get all the important people into the same conversation. Don, I personally 100% agree. That's why I think we should do too. Let's discuss it on GitHub. And as I said before, I really want to GA this, so let's decide on something and move forward.
Yeah, but I just want to restate, if we find something cannot move forward to the future, we still could be potential block. So far, at least I don't think about that's the right reason to block the GA. Our goal is the GA, okay? So people please actively to push forward to GA, but at the same time, and also I do know there's the consent. Like for example, I do know the team of Claire have the consents, and we haven't ironed out all the detail to, at least myself, to respond to his concerns, right? So, and so that's why we could still, but at the current, I don't think about at least the per pod, the end of disable is not the right way to move forward from my perspective. Yeah.
And I think you all were calling out the docs were not quite there yet for GA. And do we have a clear idea of what is needed? Because my understanding is with the new, at least it's not a retroactive policy, but ideally docs functionality, everything should be in as part of beta. And I think there was a call out to documentation.
My understanding with the documentation piece is just we have the gap of like figuring out, you know, the direction as we move towards pod level API, which I do agree is a good thing to call out and something that we should add in terms of documentation and a plan to sort of find consensus on that. So yeah, I think that is, I don't know if that's explicitly called out in the 2400 cap, but maybe should be. But that is something that is a prerequisite for our GA.
Yeah, and I think there was a tendency, I think we had a really good docs for a blog post, but I don't know if I don't know if that all those changes went into the permanent docs.
So they haven't, but as you said, like most of the information is in the blog post. I think that, you know, most of the job would be to copy paste, maybe very minor updates.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. Yeah, I just want to, I think we're calling that one out for sure as a blocker for GA. So any feature gate turning on without those website PRs up, I think, yeah, I think we all agree there. And the development code-wise, we can iterate on that one.
Great. There's nothing else on this topic. Maybe we can move on to.
Hi. This is mostly FYI. So I've been discussing autoscaling related changes, so cluster autoscaler HPA and VPA related changes with SIG autoscaling. And we have come to a conclusion, at least for HPA. So for HPA, horizontal pod autoscaling allows scaling from the two perspective. One is on the container resource and the other one is on the pod resource. So for pod resource, today they do the aggregation of container requests and then they make decisions on the basis of that. So that's going to change to using pod level resources if it's directly specified. And for container resource, even with pod level resources, we would still want to do horizontal pod autoscaling decisions to be based on container if the user specifies container request. So I have added the link. I'm adding a link here for the final proposal that Louise from SIG Autoscaling has documented. So this is based on the discussions that we had back and forth, and then finally it's there, and I'm going to add it to my KEP as well. Cluster autoscaler changes are already in. The support for pod level resources is already in. For VPA, changes will come in two phases. Phase one would be to support pod level resources to basically recommend to make recommendations for resources at the pod level. But in phase two, which is going to be a complicated change, since pod level resources allows setting pod level limits to be greater than aggregated container limits, that sort of recommendation would require changing the recommendation algorithm altogether. So that's going to come in phase two and probably along with GA and not with beta. Yeah, that's the summary of the discussion. Does anyone have any questions or concerns? looks like there are no concerns, or maybe probably we would need more context. So I'll go ahead and also add this in the KEP and would tag people so that they can comment there.
Thank you, Dixie,
Right.
for the context and for letting everyone know. Does anyone have any other items?
I have a quick update on the node readiness kits. I had a chance to discuss with a large number of folks, and right now the consensus is that, I mean, I sent a enhancement PR on this. The consensus now is that like we should explore a design where instead of agents reporting it, it should be like a probing mechanisms, like kubelet or a node level agent, like a node problem detector could update the status. So I'm exploring in this idea that would mean that I'm not sure like if that would mean that like if we could move the deadline to 1.35, but I just updated the cap, and like I'd be welcome to folks sharing their thoughts on the PR further to discuss.
Yeah, I think at this stage, because there wasn't the PRR filled out by Thursday, I think we've probably slipped 134, which is fine because I think that gives us more time to sort of get consensus around the approach, and then we can just get it in early 135.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, but definitely, I think like it's not the time, but the approach that should be mattered. Happy to discuss further on the thoughts. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, and yeah, as a just general note, we're approaching KEP freeze on Thursday, so if you have any KEPs you want to get in, make sure that there are all of the people who need to have their eyes on it do, and if you are in the mood to review KEPs, there's a lot of things to look at and a lot of exciting work to read about. So all eyes are welcome. I don't see anyone else clamoring to speak. Do we have any other items we wanted to talk about, or shall we adjourn a little bit early? Cool. Thanks, everyone. Lively discussion today, and good luck with KEP freeze. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye now.